Hi, my name is Laura, and welcome to my podcast, Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations, and through these discussions, you will hear why 9 times out of 10, the book wins. I'll also share different behind-the-scenes trivia I've discovered in my research, which by learning makes the story all the more interesting. If you love either books, movies, or both, this is the perfect podcast for you. This probably already goes without saying, but there will be spoilers for both the book and the movie in this podcast. So if you plan on reading the book or watching the movie, go do that first and then come back and listen to this. And now, without further ado, let's get right into it. Hello, and welcome back. It has been 6 months since my last podcast. I'm going to try and be a bit more consistent and not take such long breaks from here on out. You know, life sometimes just gets in the way, and this is just a side hobby I do, so just had to put it on hold for a little bit. I've still been doing a lot of reading. I haven't been watching the movies so much, but I've still been doing a lot of reading. Yeah, and I'm excited to get back into this and start posting podcasts again. So today, as you can see by the title, it is Cool Hand Luke. The book is written by Don Pierce and was published in 1965. The movie by the same name was directed by Stuart Rosenberg and released in 1967, just 2 short years later. It's always a little surprising when that happens, when it's a new author and their book gets turned into a movie so fast. But anyway, so the movie Cool Hand Luke has become one of the classics and is basically on all of those must-watch movie lists. I watched it for the first time when I was like 9 years old probably, and I remember loving it. But, I mean, there's a lot of movies I loved when I was younger, and I didn't understand them, but I loved them just because my parents and older siblings did. Nonetheless, I feel like any movie with Paul Newman, even if the storyline isn't the best, you're still going to get a great performance on his part, so it's still always worth it. I actually didn't realize till last year, 2020, that this movie is based on a book. So, naturally, I added it to my list. Don Pierce wrote the book based on his own experience on the chain gang, but we will get into him later. For now, for those who don't know the story of Cool Hand Luke, here is a synopsis. Luke is a war veteran who gets arrested for busting the heads off parking meters while intoxicated. He is sentenced to 2 years on a chain gang in Florida. Now, technically, it's a work gang because the prisoners aren't actually all chained together, though they are given ankle shackles as punishment at times. In the book, actually, his birth name is Lloyd, and he's given the name Cool Hand Luke while in prison, whereas in the movie, his birth name is Luke, and so the cool hand is just added on top of that. But anyway, so Luke, right from the start, he has a confident air about him and proves himself as one who won't be broken easily while in prison. He escapes once and is caught a few days later. He escapes another time and doesn't come back for 4 months, although we discover that the majority of that time he was just in a different prison. After the second escape, though, the guards have it out for Luke and they beat him and work him harder until he breaks and begs not to be hit again, saying that he's got his mind right. After that, not only does Luke no longer talk back, but he even becomes the runner for the guards, which a runner is just the person who gets them things and rushes to their side whenever they need something. Then one day while working on the road, because this new runner job gives him access inside the guard's truck to get stuff, he's going in there to grab something, and he just hops right in the driver's seat and drives off with a fellow prisoner in the passenger seat. This escape lasts for a few hours, but they are caught while inside an empty church. Luke ultimately ends up getting shot and killed by one of the guards, and the other prisoner is taken back to the chain gang. His memory lives on as a symbol of hope to the other prisoners. His small and big acts of unconformity help the other prisoners feel like they have more control in their own lives. So my thoughts on the book. As I said above, technically the book is fiction, but it is based on Pierce's real-life experience on the chain gang. Pierce also served in World War II, which Luke does as well. I don't know if Luke's war stories from the book are based on Pierce's own experience, though. Not really sure. But after the war, Pierce became a safecracker, but he was caught and sentenced to prison. The book was published in 1965, and the movie was released soon after. Pierce wrote the screenplay and had a non-speaking role as a prisoner named Sailor. I assumed that since he wrote the screenplay and was in the movie that it had his blessing. However, in a 1989 interview, he said, I seem to be the only guy in the United States who doesn't like the movie. Everyone had a whack at it. They screwed it up 99 different ways. One of the things he says he did not like was that Newman was too scrawny for the role of Luke. But as far as the book, I thought the first half was actually kind of boring. It's not focused on Luke. It's more just about life on the chain gang. It's interesting from a historical perspective, but from like a novel standpoint, rather than setting up location and characters and these mundane bits of life, I wished he would have just dived right into the story. Luke is introduced in the first quarter of the book, but it doesn't get particularly interesting until halfway, which is when Luke starts planning his escapes. I also didn't like the sexist aspects of the book. I get that the characters we're following are a bunch of men in prison, so of course there will be derogatory sexual talk about women. Having said that, it doesn't get graphic, but still, not my favorite part about it. There's also some racist remarks, which I guess also shouldn't be surprising since it takes place in the South in the 1950s, but still not my favorite parts. So on to the movie. For the acting, we have Paul Newman, who is, of course, Cool Hand Luke. And while reading this, how could I not picture Paul Newman in my head? His acting is on point as usual. Two scenes that especially stand out are when he's playing Plastic Jesus on the banjo after he hears about his mom's death, and the scene where he begs the guard not to hit him anymore. Also the scene where he gets the guys to work fast with tarring the road and getting them really into it so they finish early. That was also a really great scene. And, I mean, he's just amazing throughout the whole movie. George Kennedy is perfectly cast as Dragline, the main supporting character. Once again, though, I'm biased since I'd watched the movie prior to reading the book. But Kennedy campaigned heavily to be nominated for an Academy Award for his role, and it paid off. He won Best Supporting Actor that year, which in turn led him to earning more money for future movies, and he was also offered more diverse roles, because prior to this, he was always cast as the bad guy, and afterwards, he wasn't always typecast that way anymore. Strother Martin plays the captain, and has the most iconic line from the movie, which I mentioned in my podcast for True Grit, if you want to go back and listen to that one. But his line, "What we have here is failure to communicate." This line, however, doesn't actually appear in the book. But anyway, Martin does a great job. He really isn't in it all that much, but when he is, he does well. Jo Van Fleet is in this movie for about 5 minutes and plays Luke's mom. She does a wonderful job in her brief scene. Their conversation was 8 pages of dialogue, and they only had 1 day to film it, which isn't much time for a scene with that much talking. However, since Newman and Van Fleet were both theater actors, they memorized the lines quickly, and the filming went off without a hitch. Morgan Woodward almost doesn't seem worth mentioning since he literally has only 1 line in the whole movie, but he plays Boss Godfrey, the guard who wears the mirrored sunglasses. The book often talks about his sunglasses, and the movie does a great job with his character and what he symbolizes. Apparently, he had more dialogue in the original script, but the director Rosenberg felt that his voice didn't fit the look, so he cut down his lines, and he ends up only saying 1 line in the whole movie. And then there are, of course, like 15 other actors playing the guards and prisoners, one of the more notable ones being Dennis Hopper. And yeah, overall the acting by everyone is well done, and I can't think of any complaints. So on to the differences. The book starts in the present day, with a man whose nickname is Sailor telling us about life on the chain gang and describing the events of the morning, just your average morning of doing work. At bean time, which is their lunchtime, the guards have them eat near a church, and the prisoners ask Dragline to tell them about Luke because they all know that this church, where they're having lunch, is where he died. The book then goes back in time to when Luke joined them. There are a couple times it flashes forward and flashes back again, but for the most part, it stays, in the past, talking about Luke until the end. The movie doesn't have any of this. Instead, it just starts right away with Luke's arrest. At the very end of the movie, though, it does show the prisoners near the church and Dragline telling them about Luke when he died, in the same way the book starts. The Inmate Sailor exists in the movie, but his name is never said. You just know his name is Sailor from the credits. And he is played by the author Don Pierce, which is fitting because in the book Sailor was the narrator. And then Luke's arrest is a bit different because in the book he is taking the heads off parking meters and a cop comes up to him thinking he might be a city employee working late. He asks him what he's doing, and Luke has, some matter-of-fact reply. He then walks to his truck and goes driving off, causing the cop to chase after him. Whereas in the movie, the cop basically just arrests him right off the bat. Speaking of the parking meters, Newman actually took heads off real parking meters in Lodi, California, and for years they kept the street that way so people could come and see the street, made famous from this movie. But at some point, they put them back on, unfortunately. When Luke arrives at prison in the movie, they introduce all the other men that are also new. In the book, it doesn't do this. It just talks about Luke, and it might mention the other newcomers as a whole, but it doesn't get specific. There's also a scene in the movie where they mess with one of the new guys while on the way to work, and because of this, the new guy ends up being put in the box. And this also wasn't in the book. The movie also has Dragline not like Luke in the beginning. Drag is, kind of the leader of the chain gang, and when Luke shows up, he just has this confidence and doesn't abide with Drag's leadership, kind of. And so from the start, there's some tension between them. It even gets to the point where they box each other to settle their differences. After this happens, Drag respects him, and they are friends from there on out. In the book, he and Drag never have any frustration or, dislike for each other at all. It never says anything's, no specific event causes them to be friends. I think Drag was just attracted to his confident spirit, and that drew him to become friends with Luke. Early on in the movie, there is one scene where they're working on the side of the road near a house, and a woman comes out to wash a car, and it drives the men crazy. In the book, there is a scene similar to this, but it happened a little later on, and it was also a teenage girl who comes walking home, and she sees the men working, and so she goes inside and puts on a bikini, and then comes out and sunbathes. Then, in the book and the movie, Luke's mom, brother, and nephew come to visit him. In the movie, the mom is very sickly and talks about how she's going to die soon. They also mention Luke's dad, and she says how much he made him laugh, or she says how much Luke's dad made her laugh. But Luke never knew him because he had ran off before when Luke was a baby. In the book, his mom wasn't sick, and she does mention the dad, but in the book, the dad had been a preacher. And then, when Luke was old enough to remember, the dad runs off and leaves them. And because of that incident, Luke no longer believes in God because his dad was, this preacher who ended up being a hypocrite. Also in the movie, the mom mentions a girl Luke had been dating once upon a time and how she had liked her. And Luke comments that the girl had ended up going off with a guy in a convertible. This is actually talked about in the book, but it happened during Luke's second escape. So when he comes back to prison, he tells the guys that he'd been dating a girl for a bit, but she ditched him for someone with a nicer car. In both the movie and book, they give Luke his banjo when visiting. And the movie has Luke strum the banjo here and there, but he only really plays it and sings once in the movie. In the book, though, he often plays the banjo, and he'll make up his own songs. And in his songs, he'll talk about the war, and that's how we learn about his past. His banjo playing is another way that Luke becomes someone who lifts their spirits and gives them hope. And there's a line in the book that says, "So we worked our way through the spring, building our time on the hard road. The music had come into our lives, and we began our days with a new feeling, not at all afraid of the heat and the labor, the ant and the mosquito bites, the cramps and the calluses. For Luke's music had taught us to understand the melody of the leg chains, the rhythm of the floor walker's feet, the wind of the passing traffic. And for once all was harmony. We knew that our yells to count off, to pour it out, move on up, or dig a hole were just part of a prolonged and complicated hymn." In the movie, the only time he plays the banjo is when he hears about his mom's death. And as I said above, in the movie she was sick, so it didn't come as a huge surprise that she died. But in the book it was a surprise because she died of a sudden heart attack. In both, after getting the news, Luke's walk to his bunk and he quietly plays the banjo while crying. For the movie, they were going to dub the playing, and the scene was scheduled to be shot early in filming. However, Newman decided he didn't want it to be dubbed, and he wanted to actually learn to play it himself, and so they pushed it back a few weeks to give him time to practice. And then when they tried filming it, Newman just couldn't get it down, but he insisted he wanted to do it himself, and so this led to an argument between Newman and the director, Stuart Rosenberg. And then finally, the next to last day of shooting, they tried filming it again, and according to George Kennedy, the atmosphere was tense, electrically charged, and quiet. And after Newman finishes the scene, he says that he can do it once more time and he can do it even better. And Rosenberg replied saying that no one could do it better because the scene was perfect. After the death of Luke's mom, Luke is put in the box. In the movie, for the sake of the audiences, the captain explains that he's going in the box because when a man's mom dies, he gets rabid in his legs and it makes him want to try and escape. In the book, the captain doesn't explain this though because the narrator says how they all knew that that was the reason. In the movie, he's in the box and the guard walking him to it says that he's sorry and he's just doing his job. Luke replies that doing it just because it's your job doesn't make it any better. And the book does not have this exchange. Also in the book, when they open the door for Luke the next day, he's still laying down. And so the guard yells at him that he needs to stand when they open the door. And they keep him in there another day as punishment. Then the next day they open the door and Luke is standing there. And as soon as they open it, he tells them to shut the damn door. So the guard shuts him in again, shuts the door again. And Luke's defiance continues for the rest of the week. And so he stays in the box and has little to nothing to eat. Whereas in the movie, he's just in there for a day and there's no drama about it. Both the book and the movie have the scene where they're shoveling sand onto the fresh tar. And they talk about what hard work it is. And the book says that this work was Luke's favorite. And he works faster and gets the guys to work faster too. And they end up finishing it in record time. And so they have all this extra time in the day. And once again, it's just an example of Luke being an inspiration and helping them to feel more in control of their lives. And by finishing early, it's their way of sticking it to the man. This movie has a lot of famous scenes. Arguably, the most famous scene, though, is when Luke eats 50 eggs in 1 hour. And both this comes about because Drag is bragging about how much Luke can eat. And then one of the prisoners accused Drag of exaggerating, so Luke chimes in and says that he could eat 50 eggs, and the rest is history. The book builds up more the fact that Luke could eat so much, and so much more than anyone else. And there's this other inmate named Curly who has been known as eating the most, but one day he and Luke have an eating competition of sorts, and it ends in a draw. After that, Curly gives him one of his spoons, which is a bigger spoon and helps you shovel more into your mouth than a normal spoon. The movie doesn't have this backstory, but after he eats the eggs, one of the inmates does place a large spoon beside him. So that is reference to Curly from the book. And as far as credibility of someone eating 50 eggs in an hour, it can and has been done. As crazy as that is. Yeah, and I looked it up and there's people that have eaten like even more than that, which is insane to me. Anyway, in both the book and the movie, we have the escape that happens on the 4th of July. And the movie follows that storyline pretty close. That happens in the book. When Luke gets caught, in the movie, he tells them that he was caught because he stole a car. And then a cop pulled up while he was at a light and wondered what a rough guy like him was doing in such a nice car. In the book, it's a little different. It says he stole the car, which had groceries in the back. So he was able to have all sorts of foods to eat before he got caught. And then he drives to a bar parking lot and switches the license plate with another car. However, in Florida at that time, the license plate numbers that were given to certain cars in a certain county started with a 1. And then if the car exceeded a certain weight, after the 1, there was a W. Luke, however, doesn't know this, and he switches plates with a car bigger than his, so it had a W when it shouldn't have. So when a cop drove up, he noticed the wrong plate, and then he noticed Luke was in prison garb, and he arrested him. Then we have Luke's second escape. This is the famous string escape with the line, "I'm shaking it here, boss, I'm shaking it," which is a line we quote often in my family. He's gone for a few months this time, and he sends them a magazine which has a picture of him with 2 girls, and so they all think he's just living it up. He eventually returns, and in the book, when they get a chance to talk to him alone, he tells them that he had gotten a job and was seeing a girl. She wanted to get married, though, and he wasn't making enough money, and so she left him for someone else, and he took it really hard. And so he started drinking and eventually got arrested for being drunk and disorderly. When they took his fingerprints, they saw that he was an escaped convict, and he was resentenced and returned to the chain gang. When they ask him about the picture, he says that he used a week's worth of pay to have the photo taken because he wanted to send something to cheer them up. In the movie, Luke is brought in after having been beat up upon his return from his escape. And while he's clearly not feeling great, they start pestering him with all these questions, and he tells them that the picture was a phony, but they keep pestering him, being like, it couldn't be a phony. And Luke eventually gets up to get away from them, and he yells them to stop living off of him. In the book and movie, Luke is basically tortured by the guards until he breaks. The movie has a scene where they have him dig and undig a hole over and over again, during which time he begs them, and they're beating him too. And during this time, he begs them to stop hitting him. And in the movie, they're out on the road working, and he's being beat, and that's where he begs them to stop. After this, Luke becomes a teacher's pet, so to speak. In the movie, there's a scene where he's fetching the rifle for Godfrey. Then Godfrey uses it to shoot a turtle, and Luke goes out and gets the turtle. This actually happened earlier in the book, though, before he even runs away. And Luke isn't the one running to get the turtle and stuff. He's just there witnessing it. And in the scene, the guard has the turtle cleaned out so that he can cook it for lunch. And so they have the head cut off. The head rolls down the hill to where Luke is. And because it's a snapping turtle, even though it's a severed head, he puts a stick up to it and it still snaps the stick. And it snaps so hard that it bites it, or it breaks the stick. And it's actually kind of a gross scene the way it's described, because it's a severed turtle's head and all. Anyway, in the movie, Luke goes and gets the dead turtle, after which he hops in the truck and he drives away. The book is similar, where Luke was getting stuff for the guard while he was out on the road, and then he and Drag hop in the car and take off. And throughout the book, there are, it talks about Luke's lack of faith, beginning with the history of his dad. In both, there is a scene where it's getting stormy and he's talking to God, and Dragline, who believes in God, says that Luke shouldn't do that and that God might strike him down with lightning. And Luke tempts God, saying, why don't you strike me down? Later, when he runs away and he's in the church, he once again starts talking to God. In the book, he and Dragline never split up, and so when Drag hears him talking to God, he tells him that he shouldn't say such blasphemous things in a church. And Drag even gets on his knees and starts sincerely praying because he's scared of being punished by God for what Luke is saying. In the movie, Luke and Drag split up, and so Luke goes in the church by himself, and he starts talking to God, and he even gets down on his knees at one point and is sincerely praying, which is different from the book. After his prayer, he hears the cops coming up, and Drag comes in and says that the cops have found him, and that he has negotiated with them, and that he would show them where Luke is as long as they can just go back to the chain gang as if nothing ever happened. In the book, Drag doesn't do any of this negotiating. The cops just show up, and Drag goes and hides. And in both the book and the movie, though, Luke is standing in a window or the doorway or something, and he's shot in the neck. And in both, they say they're going to drive him to the inmate hospital, which is over an hour away, and they know Luke will die on the way there, but they do it anyway because they don't care. In both, it ends with the present day, Drag wearing his ankle shackles because he's being punished for having run away, and he's telling the others about Luke, and we see how he lives on as a symbol of hope with them. So, in the end, if I like the book or the movie better, I have to go with the movie on this one. I know this may just be because I saw the movie before reading the book, and it's just such a classic. But honestly, I don't know if I would have stuck with the book had it not been for the movie. So if I'd never watched the movie and I started the book, I feel like I probably wouldn't have finished it because the first half was just kind of slow going. Though, like I said, historical aspect, it's interesting to learn what life was like for them. But the acting by everyone is just so spot on, and Newman gives such an amazing performance all the way around, and honestly, I just don't think I would recommend the book. Since there's the movie, just watch the movie. It's better anyway. Unless, if you're a diehard fan of the movie, you probably should read the book, I guess, just comparison sake or something. But yeah, this is a time where the book does not win, and the movie is the better one between the two. That wraps it up for Cool Hand Luke. I probably sound a bit rusty in this podcast because, like I said, it's just been 6 months since I've recorded one, and it takes some adjusting to get used to doing this again. But I hope you will join me for the next one, which is going to be Girl Interrupted, which honestly, now that I think about it, is somewhat similar to Cool Hand Luke. It's all females instead of all males, and Cool Hand Luke is a chain gang, whereas Girl Interrupted is about girls in a mental institution. So prisoners in a different way. But yeah, join me for that next week, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, head over to my site, whythebookwins.com. You can leave a comment there and I will be sure to reply. You can also find me on Instagram under the same name, Why the Book Wins, and you can message me there, and don't forget to follow. And also don't forget to subscribe to my podcast and join me next Wednesday for the newest episode of Why the Book Wins.